Hey, today I want to talk about the trauma bond, which is so often discussed online, and I get so many questions about this. So I compiled the questions down that I get most frequently, and I want to answer them for you here today. First, let's look at what is the trauma bond. It's a traumatic experience where we bond to our abuser. So it means there's an abusive party who create a lot of anxiety and fear in us, and at the same time we bond. It's an addictive experience and also chemically an addiction that happens in the brain where you actually, similar to a drug addiction, alcohol addiction, become addicted to this person, and we tend to often stand up for them, minimize the abuse, or make excuses for them. Which is when we are bonded and we find it struggling to leave, we want to keep going back again and again. So we could also call it to some extent an addiction, but we'll talk more about the details of this later. So let's look at what actually causes the trauma bond. The first part of it is what referred to as intermittent reinforcement. Now, what is this? Intermittent reinforcement is the push-pull, the ups and downs, and essentially this happens through what initially, as you probably have experienced, is the love bombing, the intense idolization, glorification of you, compliments, the mirroring of liking the same things as you in the beginning, and all this stuff that makes you feel huge level of what called dopamine, the reward hormone in your brain, and oxytocin with the physicality that makes you trust them a lot. And it feels great, it feels amazing, right? That's when you fell in love and thought you found your soulmate, and it was like almost too good to be true. Well, it was too good to be true, which obviously you discovered. And what then happened is suddenly the abuse happened, and we get the opposite, and we get the mix of anxiety. We could suddenly get a lot of adrenalin and cortisol, which is anxiety and fear. And when you mix the reward circuit in the brain and switch it suddenly into anxiety and then back to small snippets of reward and then create anxiety again, you get what's called intermittent reinforcement. And actually they form the strongest bonds where we get the most attached to someone. So that's what's happening in your brain as you actually become addicted and trauma bonded. It's why it's so hard to leave. It's why it's so hard to go no contact. So let's look at what actually makes us vulnerable to this whole thing in the first place. Because we must understand our own mind to not replay this again and again and again. And while I can't go into therapy about your old wounds in this video, I can talk about some generic things that you can do to be aware of. The first one is called cognitive dissonance. So what is this? Cognitive dissonance is that our minds struggle to hold two opposite views of the same person. So that means initially when they love bomb us, they're so great, they're so sweet and charming. Then we build an idea that this is a really nice, loving, wonderful person. When suddenly the abuse comes, this new thing that we're experiencing completely contradict our initial idea about this person is. And because our brains struggle to hold two contradictory ideas about the same person or two different opposite views of the same person, then what we tend to do is to diminish, minimize, or even start forgetting some of the abuse and just remember the good parts. And this bias is very, very dangerous. And also remember, we have a bias with a tendency to interpret the world through our own frame of reference, meaning if we are able to change, we tend to believe other people can do that. And again, if we feel empathy, we tend to believe others do the same. If we have good intent, we tend to believe others do the same. This can be very dangerous because some people don't. The narcissist, the sociopsychopath don't. They don't have empathy. They don't change. They don't have good intent. And if we keep interpreting their actions through that, we keep making excuses, believing they might change or go back to this nice person. And that's pulling us into this lie where we keep accepting the abuse. So one effective tool to avoid cognitive dissonance and these other biases is to use journaling, because your mind will often forget and only remember the good bits and minimize the bad bits. But through journaling, you can go back and remind yourself about how the abuse actually was, what actually happened when your mind tricks you. And that will be an important process to detangle and get out of this. And also, again, what makes you vulnerable to this is empathy without boundaries. While empathy is beautiful and the ability to feel for other people, care about other people, empathy without boundaries become a people pleaser. And I don't mean this in a judgmental way. It makes sense. If you're a people pleaser, that's how you learn to feel safe in the world. But again, it means that we make excuses for our partner's behavior because we don't have clear boundaries. If we had clear boundaries, we would be totally clear about what is not acceptable, and we would be empathetic but say stop. And it would also not make us a target in the first place, because these people specifically target highly empathetic, caring people who lack boundaries. They even test for it purposefully initially in different ways. They might see if somebody needs your chair, will you get up for that person? They will see, are you always willing to compromise your own needs basically to accommodate others? Those are the perfect people that a narcissist, a social psychopath will target. Now, how do we break the trauma bond? Because it's all great knowing all this, but maybe you're there right now and it sucks and you want to go back and it's so painful. So the first part is we know that healing is a social process, so don't try and do this in isolation. You need social support and secure attachment figures. It can be a therapist, but preferably there's other people in your life that can be this too. They found in very interesting research that in places where they basically had child soldiers, the kids that have been child soldiers and been to war and seen horrible things, that went back to a tribe that rejected them, where there weren't tribal integration and support, they pretty much all developed post-traumatic stress disorder. By the one who went back into a tribe where they were accepted, had support, and there was lots of rituals for healing in a social context, pretty much none of them showed any symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. So a big part of your healing has to be made social, and I'll talk more about why self-love is a lot of nonsense and not very helpful in another video, but be social. Needing others is important. It's how we heal. We have a social brain. Then we need to replace the dopamine and oxytocin that was created in the love bombing stage so we can get it somewhere else. That can be setting small goals. When we achieve a small goal, we get a release of dopamine that makes us feel good. Social contact, as I said, oxytocin, which is the trust hormone, you can get, but also makes us feel, good. Is about, you can get that through massage, through cuddles, physical touch is amazing, through eye contact. So do some of these things that are healthy ways to get the same hormones without going back to the toxicity. Then we need to reduce adrenaline and cortisol, because when we're in a state of fear, we can't think clearly, and all we want is that fear to be relieved, which often we think is the narcissist, social psychopath, or cluster B, who we think can do that. However, as you know, that doesn't work because they end up just creating more stress and fear. So you can reduce that by doing exercise, things like yoga. Meditation can be good, but a lot of traumatized people struggle to meditate because they're in so much discomfort, which is why the element of movement and meditating, like yoga, where you actually breathe or with your breath but move your body at the same time, is great at reducing stress. And a lot of interesting research is coming out proving this too. The last part is called integration, and it means that the memories were not stored correctly, which is why you're often stuck in this loop when we're in a trauma response. And by using integration, meaning integrating cognition, thought, which for example through journaling, talking, expressing it that way, emotions, allowing emotions to be expressed, and integrate left and right brain through things like arts, expressing your emotions through arts, or also somatically, which is the bodily sensations, which is something we often forget when implementing trauma, is the fact that we need to also, feel safe in our body again. And you can do that with boundary works, lots of things. I do this with my clients. It's a huge topic. So, subscribe to the channel. Go check out, like I said, my free guide and webinar and all that stuff on my website. There's lots of free stuff. And also, if you want personal help, you can contact me for one-to-one coaching or check out my online program as well. There's loads of help. You don't have to feel awful, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.